So welcome everybody. It's really great to see you folks. We're going to keep admitting people here for a couple of minutes, but I'll just make a couple of announcements and then I'll get us started. So I want to welcome everybody to the call. I have disabled the unmute function and a couple of other Zoom functions, but for everybody out there watching, we're going to have a program that includes some presentations and then has a Q&A and some breakout rooms at the end. So those settings will be reset a little bit later. I also just want to let everybody know who's popping in that we are going to record this session. We won't be recording the Q&A or the breakout rooms. So places where our audience is participating, those sections will not be recorded, but the rest of our session tonight will be recorded, and we'll be sharing that recording with the public imminently. So welcome and thanks everybody for being here. So my name is Kristen Reed. I'm contingent faculty here at VCU. I've taught in our general education program for about 13 years. I also serve as VCU's elected representative on the Executive Board of United Campus Workers of Virginia. That's our wall-to-wall union that was built by faculty, staff, graduate, and undergraduate workers across the campus and across the state. Tonight's town hall is organized and hosted by UCWVA. We've got a lot of members on the call, solidarity with all our members who are here. We are a proud union campus at VCU, and we're really excited to have everybody here. So I'm going to just give us a quick introduction, and then I'll hand things over to Kate Diedrich. I want to talk just for a second about why we're here tonight. Most of you, like me, are probably here because you've heard that the university is in crisis. Our union members are on this call tonight to tell you that we agree. The university is in crisis, but it's not the crisis that administration would have you believe. Our administration has pushed the narrative that the university is on the brink of financial collapse, stemming from enrollment declines, reduced state funding, and inflated operational and capital costs. While we recognize an overall trend in declining enrollment at VCU, we also know that this is not the whole picture. And I do want to flag that just today on the Connect Ed calls on campus, administration announced that almost 4,900 incoming first-year students have accepted their acceptance offers to VCU. So that would be a record-breaking incoming class. What we are here tonight to talk about is that whether enrollment is up or down, we know that our institution, VCU, has the money to weather challenges that it faces in the year to come. And we believe that VCU has that money without harming workers and without raising tuition on our students. The real crisis, we would argue, has been manufactured by the largest and most expensive executive administration our university has ever seen. That crisis is a crisis of disinvestment, both in workers and in students. In short, the crisis is austerity. Our agenda tonight is organized into 3 presentations and a set of breakout rooms. In the formal presentations, you're going to hear from Kate Diedrich, our strategic researcher with our national union, CWA. She'll be walking us through an introductory understanding of VCU's present-day financial situation, particularly relative to our predicted 2024 fiscal cliff. She'll also speak with us a bit about the RCM budget model adopted by VCU in the last couple of years, which has pitted units against one another and left far too many schools and colleges in the red. Finally, you're going to hear from one of my coworkers, one of my colleagues in the Department of Focused Inquiry, about the threat to fire 1/3 of our educator workforce, a choice that would have absolutely disastrous effects for both workers and for students. We teach first-year students in Focused Inquiry. Mass layoffs of our coworkers specifically are going to leave those 4,900 incoming freshmen in absolute crisis come registration day. Following our formal presentations, we'll move into breakout rooms. We'll have a Q&A for everybody, and then we'll move into breakout rooms where all of our participants can hear from organizing committees focused on economic justice and public health initiatives on campus. So welcome, everyone. I am very excited to hand things over to Kate Diedrich, our first presenter. Just a quick note about Kate. Kate is a senior strategic researcher with Communication Workers of America, where she supports public sector locals across the Southeast. Before joining CWA, Kate conducted campaign research for racial and economic justice organizations across the country. She began her career in the labor movement in 2012 as an organizer with SEIU, where she helped organize adjunct faculty in Boston. Welcome, Kate. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I am just going to jump right in to talk about VCU's financial strength. So VCU is in a strong financial position. And in fact, they have strengthened their position in particular, the last 4 years. So what you see on the screen is a series of financial scores. We're not going to really get into the details on where the numbers behind, we'll get into some of the details of where the numbers behind these scores come from, but we won't talk in depth about accounting methods or each of these metrics. However, I do want to say that I follow the accounting methodology of a trusted accountant who's a professor in Michigan. His name is Howard Bunsis, and he developed the methods that I underground the research I'll be presenting today in order to provide a union side or faculty worker student side analysis of higher education financials. He does extremely rigorous research. You can search him, see his websites, his videos. However, just as we will notice as we continue to talk about this at VCU, every administration that he challenges with his analysis, or that we as a union challenge with our same rigorous methods of analysis, will tell us that we're doing this wrong, will challenge our methodological approach, will try to poke holes in it. So that is in part, which we'll cover, about how they would like us to think that the financial overviews and the budget overviews that they present are an objective set of circumstances rather than a set of choices and a set of priorities based on their political intentions and their political framework, which may or may not be ours. In this case, it is not ours. And so just to demystify a little bit what you're looking at, the viability score that you see here, it measures VCU's expendable resources, so how much money they have available to cover debt immediately. And as you can see, this is a scale, 1 being weak, 5 strong. They have significantly improved this score, which was one of their weaker, out of a general score of very high, right? And they've significantly improved it, in particular in 2020 and 2021. We'll talk about those years in this presentation. The primary reserves rate score provides a snapshot of VCU's health by indicating how long VCU could function without relying on any additional funds generated by operations. So most of us are familiar with the word reserves. This essentially means that, in particular, over the last 4 years, they have continued to amass a amount of reserves that puts them in a very healthy situation. Cash flow score measures the institution's ability to pay their current debts with cash that they generate during that same period. Here they are extremely strong, the strongest they could be. And then their net asset score is about the general financial health of their assets and how those set them up to continue to expand and generate revenue from those. So again, VCU is in very, very healthy financial position, and it's grown stronger over the last 4 years. We'll dig a little deeper on this. So what you're looking at now is VCU's total revenue, total expenses, and the change in net position each year from 2012 to 2022. The orange line is how much money they brought in through revenues. The gray line is how much money they spent, salaries, benefits, building maintenance, student services, everything they spent. The change in net position is the money left over at the end of the year after they had covered their expenses. So it's their change in net position once expenses were covered. So they netted $158 million in 2021 and $145 million in 2022. I do want to just, we're talking a lot. VCU is pointing to some numbers, not all of them. They're often pointing to state appropriations and tuition and fees. It is true that VCU is very reliant on these two pots of money, and that next year, if those shrink, that is a problem. We acknowledge that. What they often don't talk about, and when they talk about it, they say, it's earmarked, it's this, it's that, we can't touch it, it's over here, is this 40% of annual revenue that's coming from sales and services, auxiliaries, dorms, dining, other auxiliary services, gifts, and an other bracket, which needs further research. So I invite you all to join me because that's a big chunk. And so this is just a snapshot of how they earn revenue. This is another metric of financial health. We're looking at the ratio of how much they own, total assets, to how much they owe, total liabilities. What they own versus what they owe has improved significantly since 2019. That's why one of the reasons this is underlying those first metrics that I covered, putting them in very strong financial position. I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I will tell you that one of Howard Bunce's, the union side accountant, the worker and student side accountant, one of his methods is that he takes out from liabilities a huge chunk that accounting rules make the university put in, and they will point to when they talk to us to say they have no money, but when they do their own analysis of what they actually have that's, expendable compared to what they owe, they will take it out because it is their liability of what they owe on the pension. The pension is paid by the state. There's a very conservative approach where we say that the higher ed institution has to put that obligation to the pension on their own books in case the state goes bankrupt. However, that is not the case. It has not been the case. And even in their own notes after each year, they will recalculate this, take some of that pension obligation out. So here's where we see a different approach to how we might contest and challenge some of the narratives. They have a very healthy own set of things they own, buildings and land, and in comparison, not very much debt. Sorry about that. So, okay, at the end of fiscal year 2022, VCU had nearly $572 million in reserves, enough to cover 5.5 months of total operating expenses. So this is the number that is underlying that primary reserve score that I showed you at the beginning. 5.5 months of covering operating expenses, assuming no money comes in. That is a lot of reserves. That is extremely healthy reserves. If they are in a financial crunch, maybe they've spent some of this. I will flag all of this as it takes us to the end of FY 2022. We can acknowledge maybe some of it, not all of it. That's $572 million in reserves. Of course, they want to keep some in reserves, but they have plenty. And in fact, in 2019, they had a lot less. So we are in a really good position at the end of fiscal year 2022 with very healthy reserves. In addition, VCU has access to $204 million in liquid cash. This is a snapshot coming from their own debt disclosures that they have to tell the creditors how much money they can get in case they need to pay their debts. Not only do they have access to assets they can get within a day themselves, but they have a $75 million line of credit. What else is a line of credit for if it's not for a really bad year to bail out students, workers, and the community and uphold the bottom line interests of VCU? It's also just worth noting that banks do not give institutions that are in absolute financial crisis $75 million as a line of credit. So, all right, we know from our perspective, they are in a healthy financial position. We know from their perspective, they are. They're telling creditors they're in a really healthy financial position because they're taking out debt to continue to expand. So what is this budget crisis? So according to VCU, and you all know this better than I do, but the budget crisis comes from projected enrollment declines, cuts in appropriations or possible cuts, increased spending on employee salaries, increased spending on construction, debt, maintenance, and other expenses due to inflation. VCU is citing the expectation of a $59.8 million deficit. So that's what we're talking about with this crisis. We do acknowledge enrollment is going down, but this is not a new trend. So this is a full-time equivalent students, and essentially that is taking for part-time students only taking 25% of what you all would consider a full-time load and making them into one full-time equivalent, so we can compare apples to apples. And from 2014 to 2021, there is a steady, but slight, actually, in the scheme of things, enrollment decline. And that trend is continuing into next year, we think. So that does, back to the map of how they bring in money, they are absolutely reliant on tuition and fees. And that does mean that their total tuition revenue, as you see here, and by the way, this is adjusted for inflation using a higher ed inflation calculator, HEPI. So adjusting for inflation, we see that student tuition revenue per student, that's the blue line, is remaining, pretty steady in terms of VCU's bottom line. That's to say nothing about students going into increasing debt, dealing with this inflation themselves. But this is about how it's hitting VCU's books. So as you can see on the orange line, the state appropriations per full-time equivalent student is nowhere where it needs to be. We are a public higher education union, a public union. We need most of the revenue over time to come from the state, fully funded, fully public institutions. So I do not say this by saying that the state is fully funding VCU, especially given the need for increased funding from the state because of the student population at VCU and the equity concerns there with so many students that can't afford education. However, the state has been increasing their appropriations per student, per full-time equivalent student, especially again over the last 4 or 5 years. So the bottom line, there are challenges coming up in FY24, but they are part of the normal 10 years ups and downs at VCU and most higher ed institutions, and they could have been anticipated, and likely they were. VCU has deep pockets, plenty in reserves, access to cash and credit, and diversified revenue sources. Most importantly, the projected hole of $59 million in FY24 can be filled without cuts or increasing tuition, using a combination of reserves, credit, cuts to planned construction, borrowing if they need to. If this is a crisis over people, their lives, their livelihoods, students, their well-being, access that credit line. Upper level executives have different priorities, however, and a convenient budget model that allows them to point to cuts, increase tuition as inevitable. And now I'm going to turn to talking about this budget model. So VCU's budget model, otherwise known as responsibility-centered management, RCM, it allows upper level executives to manufacture consent. It pays rhetorical lip service to transparency, but relies on arcane algorithms to redirect education and research as equations that determine who gets what. The algorithms underlying the model are held up as objective, but they obscure that upper level executives have designed them based on their priorities. Everyone in the system over time begins to get steeped in the budget logic. That's why we're not talking about reserves. We're not talking about priorities in spending on construction and the master, why the master plan isn't put on hold or delayed. That's why we're only talking at each of your units or each of your, colleges about how much money you all are bringing in and how many seats you have in chairs and so on. So that's because it's been designed that way based on a politics and a set of priorities. But of course, we're going to get steeped into this logic. Colleges with budget deficits are failing to innovate, failing to, in VCU's own words, adopt an entrepreneurial spirit and take calculated, well-informed risks. It's units' faults when they don't bring in tuition revenue, when they don't attract new students. Meanwhile, they have no say over huge pots of money that administration is assuming they're using to bring in more revenue. Absolutely huge spending on high-end dormitories, high-end facilities, development, construction, for instance. So I've laid out just a little bit of the big picture problems with RCM. This is a budget model universities across the country are dealing with. It's a management side, neoliberal privatization, corporate model. Unions have been fighting it around the country. We know a lot about it and its problems from across the labor movement. But I want to hand it over to Mark Wood, who is an associate professor in religious studies at VCU, to talk a little bit about how this plays out on campus.
I'll start by saying thank you so much, Kate, for putting this all together. I really super appreciate all the work that goes into this. And also start by saying, I think what you've described here in terms of the RCM is certainly what I've experienced, my colleagues have experienced for a number of years now. And I'll just make a couple of comments. These are really reflections on what I know, of course, and I'm sure others can add more to this. One of the things I would start with is just the overarching shift in culture from a much more cooperative, focus on how can we work together toward what, and you've described it here, use the word entrepreneurial ethic of look out for yourself and look out for your own program, and that you are in many respects in competition with other units, other programs at VCU. So we move away from a kind of ethic of we're in it together to really provide our students with the best possible education that really is complementary in terms of drawing from different disciplines and supporting each other, to again, one where we're all looking at ways that we can recruit more majors and more students to take our courses in competition with others. It sets up a kind of win-lose logic, you might say, in relationship to our colleagues. And so I've been really troubled by that shift of the kind of general cultural attitude. And so I think it's very much contrary to certainly my vision of the university as a place where we work together to support each other rather than a kind of cutthroat competition. And I'll add, just to kind of give a concrete example of this, that when I was serving as chair of the School of World Studies, as director, I was always presented with statistics on how we are failing in comparison to other units in the college to recruit enough majors. But of course, there are only so many students, so it really set us up, right, to measure each other in terms of who's getting more than the other unit. And that, again, I would just say sort of is the exact opposite of the kind of culture that I think we absolutely need to provide the best education we can. I'll also note then more specifically with regard to funding that with an introduction of the RCM model, that as far as I know, nothing has really changed in terms of what has been a continuing reduction of support for our programs and in very specific ways. So reduction in the number of adjunct taught courses. 3 or 4 years ago, we were asked to reduce the number of courses taught by part-time faculty by 50%. And there was no corresponding increase in the hiring of full-time faculty. And in fact, let's give the example of the program that I'm in religious studies. We had 8 full-time faculty 6 years ago. We now have 4, and there is absolutely no discussion of hiring again to replace those faculty. We've seen a corresponding then with the reduction of number of sections of courses and faculty, a reduction in the number of our majors. We simply cannot offer sufficient courses for our students to satisfy the degree requirements. And that story, I know, can be told across programs across the entire college and further across the university. And so part of what I want to say is that what's called a budget crisis, I feel like I've been hearing something like this for many, many years, and the RCM model has done nothing to alter that crisis whatsoever. In fact, it's just continuing cover, I would say, for the same kinds of policies that have reduced our capacity to offer our students the best education possible. And the last thing I'll say, which is, of course, that's something we all know, and we've all talked about quite a bit, which is that there is never, ever any discussion of cuts to administration or cuts to initiatives and other kinds of costs for offices and personnel who are not directly, at least as far as I can tell, doing anything to support teaching and research, right? The fundamental missions of our university. So again, these are just some of the things that I would say. Just to start the overview again of the dramatic shift of culture. I'm happy that my colleagues have done everything in their power to resist the kind of self-centeredness that goes with this competition between programs, and to continue to work in solidarity with each other. I think we've done a good job of that. But structurally, we are discouraged, I think, increasingly from working in that way. And then the ways in which the RCM has done really nothing that I can see of benefit to slow down the continuing reduction of support for teaching and research. So I'll stop there, and just if others want to say, I don't know if we have space for others at this point, but I'll just stop there. And thank you again.
Appreciate you, Mark. Proud union member too. I forgot to introduce Mark as a union member and leader. So thank you for making those points. I do want to say, tied to that, RCM is just a budget model. It is not doing anything here. It is exactly what you said. It's providing cover. It's providing, a convenient way for them to place blame, justify cuts, put this into individual units, pit them against one another, and encourage this sort of competition. However, as I know from the short history of the union, we get all of us workers, all of you at VCU get to make a new culture, build power. You could radically change how the budget model works and the culture at work at VCU. And that's one thing that we are trying to do, which is to point to the ways in which administration, upper level executives have a lot of unilateral control to exert power, absolutely, but so do we. And that is essential to our ability right now to critically investigate whether they have the money, where they have it, where it's being prioritized, and for you all to build the university and build the workplace and the higher education that you deserve and students deserve. So I will continue, now that we know a little bit about how this is playing out, to talk in particular about how they're using this during this quote unquote budget crisis coming next year. So in a year where enrollment and appropriations revenue are down and spending is up, RCM allows VCU upper level executives to frame the conversation only around these budget lines, appropriations, enrollment, excluding reserves, decisions to spend accumulated resources on construction and land acquisition, millions in special projects, the administrative bloat that we'll look at soon, and more. They can also lay blame for the problem on academic and research units and require that they impose cuts and austerity on workers and students in order to balance budgets. Until we grow our power significantly so that we have the ability to stop them and prevent them and make demands, we will have to deal in some degree in some of your campaigns with this logic. However, that's one reason we're bringing everyone here tonight. We do have a choice. We can build a power, we can build a union, and we can challenge this sphere of struggle that they have tried to bound us within. So back to kind of the numbers. So RCM and this crisis, if you remember, in 2021 and 2022, VCU had a change in their net position of $158 and $145 million, respectively. That's what was left over from revenue once expenses were covered. That's $303 million in 2 years. This is a 160% increase in their average change in net position from the 9 previous years. I'll say that again. This is a 160% increase in their average change in net position from the 9 previous years. Much of this increase is due to massive COVID-19 federal bailout funds that were intended to support faculty and students. I hope most of that did go directly to students. A lot of it was direct student aid. We know from union research around the country that much of the institutional spending from the COVID-19 bailout was not spent on workers. In fact, they were allowed to spend a lot of that money on raises to everyone, hazard pay, increases to salaries, they could have spent it there. So this 30 something million in the raise that they're pointing to, their portion of the raise, that could have already been covered by big raises during COVID-19 using those funds. Where has the 303 million from these years been spent? I'm sure we will get some of those answers. And I am positive that it will be priorities that have been shaped by upper level administration, executives, the board, not workers, not students. And if what we are in fiscal year 24 is a crisis, even though they have improved significantly their overall financial position, then we know that they are not prioritizing those funds and those money in this direction. Okay, so a little bit, I've talked about it. We've talked about it a little bit, but let's get more specific. What are their priorities? They want to cut costs to instruction. That they think they can do cheaply with contingent lines, adjunct lines, graduate students. They want to increase revenue regardless of the impact on student debt. I should mention that in order to where they're cutting costs to instruction, they want to move some of that to research, high profile research, mega research labs, expand their prestige status among the R1s, become a more competitive R1 institution. You all know this well. They want to increase their revenue, it seems. They say they want to center equity and the needs of their student population, but their actions speak louder than words. So it seems like they want to increase revenue regardless of the impact on student debt. They want to attract full paying out-of-state and international students, including by building high-end dorms and facilities, which they have an underlying assumption that that's what they need in order to attract these students in this competitive, consumer-driven higher ed market. Higher education is a public good, not a consumer good. So we reject that premise. They want to act as a development wing for the city of Richmond, buying up and developing land and buildings. We know this is tied to attracting full-paying students, research dollars, building labs, and so on. I know that even a former president said Richmond is a dump, essentially, and we need to fix it. They want to expand their investment wing and their investment practices to make more money, including through high-risk financial derivatives and financing outside of public control. Virginia is one of the only states in this country that has a almost fully deregulated public higher education finance structure. We're going to work on another report going deeper on this later, but I will flag they want to do that. They're doing it. They are really outside of the norm still of how their investment dollars and how their endowment and how their debt is funded. And it's pretty high risk. And there's a lot of money in that space going to extremely rich financial management companies. And we don't even see how much money that is. That's completely hidden. So here's just some evidence. Here is here are two graphs. One is 2012 on the left. One is 2022 on the right. Between the 2012 and 2022, so over 10 years, they went from spending 43% on instruction and 20% on research to spending 35% on instruction and 25% on research. You'll also see an uptick in institutional support. That is a line item that they have to categorize their management, business, finance, IT wings under. And we can acknowledge probably there was pretty expansive growth in IT, but it wasn't, some of those decisions were not led by workers, by faculty governance or anything. So we can still be a little skeptical there, but regardless, I'll show you in a minute how much they've increased their spending on management, finance, and business. So a big shift though here from instruction to research. Between 2014 and 2022, VCU spent $866 million on the purchase of new land and buildings, $866 million. In that same period, $149 million was paid on interest alone, $149 on interest. Remember the whole we're talking about, keep it always in mind, $59 million. Priorities. This is especially troubling, I think. VCU took on $54 million. This is purchase of buildings and land, 2014 to 2022. They took on 54 million in debt between 2020 and 2022. They wrote in their mandatory debt filings during the pandemic in January 2020, the university's current expectation is that it will issue no more than 40 million in total additional debt by fiscal year end 2022. They proceeded to spend 14 million beyond the 40 million cap they set. $59 million hole, here's 14 million they spent just in these last few years, when absolutely inflation was already unpredictable. Higher ed's enrollment challenges were absolutely on the horizon. So again, choices. They're expanding construction, as you all know. They will say a lot of that money that is the change in net position is earmarked for these projects. Again, those were choices. They continue to be choices. So they also have an argument that expanding in these key areas, research, luxury facilities, money-making programs, like the new dentistry school that will be funded despite this budget crisis, will increase their future revenue. Many of us would disagree that this is the way to build a public institution, prioritizing students, teaching, learning, research. So here's where we can talk a little bit about their increase in spending, their shift in spending priorities from faculty, staff, support, clerical, service workers to business, finance, and management. So you are looking at a graph showing on the left that between 2017 and 2021, VCU's total employment went down by 1%. In that same period, so that's all employees, faculty, both research and instruction, took a 5% hit, service staff, 7% hit, academic support staff, a 32% drop. Shameful. Clerical workers, key workers that, support all of the higher ed institution, 41% drop. But guess who has grown by 48% in that period? Business, finance, and management employees. 48%. So to summarize and wrap up here, because we're at time, students, workers in the Richmond community have different priorities and assumptions from those that I've just outlined of upper level executives. The RCM budget model is not an objective tool. We cannot allow them to, confine our arena of debate and financial resources to the RCM budget model. It reflects the priorities of upper level executives and their decisions and their choices. Enrollment declines won't be addressed by cutting spending on faculty and staff. In fact, we believe the opposite, when enrollment will continue to go down as you continue to deprioritize the very people who make VCU work. Prioritizing resources on construction, acquisition, development of new money-making programs is not the answer. No matter what, those that work and learn at VCU should decide how to address any shortfalls and how resources should be prioritized. Revenue cannot and should not be stabilized on the backs of students through increased tuition, fees, and debt. Long-term, we must fight for full public funding and public control over our public institutions. I'm outlining their financial health. We may not want them to be this financially healthy so they can take on increased debt and build new buildings. However, in the context we're in now, where we need to build our union organization, our student power, our worker power united, we do need to demand that they spend the money they have amassed in the short term to prioritize making no cuts and not increasing tuition. Long-term, we have to fight again for full public funding and public control over our public institutions. So I will stop there. And I think we have a Q&A at this point, right, Kristen?
Yes, we do. I'm going to pause recording and then we can proceed with the Q&A. All right, we are back online and our next speaker is going to be Ryan Kales, who will be talking about the layoffs campaign that is running in my own department right now.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you everyone for being here, and thanks again, Kate, for all of this information. So I'm gonna talk really quickly, or try to be quick about this, just what's going on in my unit, especially considering all the stuff that we've talked about, but also highlighting, the curious nature of money at our university, and the vulnerability of term faculty right now, and the dangers that we're all facing with the restructuring that the provost wants to do. So we have been told fairly recently that we have overspent the past 3 years. So what I want to do is I want to give an overview of the past several years and hone in on a couple of things, and then we can go from there. So here's a ton of stuff, but just like an overview and as quick as possible. So our dean was hired in the fall of 2018, and the first thing that she did was hire external reviewers to find the slack in our department. And what she found was that there is none, or that they found rather, is that there is none. In fact, that we do a ton, we're overworked. The 4-4 loads, teaching at 22 a piece, is not the suggested amount for classes that are comparable to ours, and we are underpaid. So what they suggested was that we would try to move towards a 3-3 load, adopting what was going to be in place anyway in the fall of 2019, there's 19 student cap, and suggested that we start hiring and adding faculty lines each year, for the next 5 years. So in the fall of 2019, 7 full-time faculty were hired, 6 renewable contracts, 1 non-renewable. The caps of the courses were changed to 19, ostensibly because of this helping with student success and support, but it's an open secret. This is about U.S. News and World Report rankings. But this is an important point just because it was demanded that we keep our caps at 19. So a search was conducted, but because of COVID, the hiring processes were paused. And also, because of COVID, in light of that, the new hires of that year were all their contracts were made terminal over the summer. So no one knew about this except for the people impacted. And that continued to be the case, that our department didn't know about these things until when we started organizing to get faculty aware of this and to drum up support for the faculty impacted to get these contracts reinstated. So this is like the wonderful cliffhanger of we did it. There we go. So the contracts were reinstated. We told the faculty. So again, no one was knowing this in the fall until the end in December when we started having one-on-one conversations with people. The contracts were reinstated. In the fall of 2021, 4 full-time faculty were hired, 1 with renewable contracts, 3 hired on a 1-year non-renewable. A search is done, and is planned and approved by the provost. At the same time, our chair of many years moved universities in the beginning of the semester. And rather than have an internal election, like our bylaws set precedent for, like we've done in the past, our dean wanted to have an external search. Almost unanimously, our faculty disapproved of this, and we made that very vocal to administration. It went to the provost. The provost sided with the dean, saying that this was important to have this outside search, and to bring new blood into the department. So while these 2 things are happening, the faculty search is happening virtually, the chair search is happening in person. 6 new people are hired on renewable contracts. The external chair is hired. This is when budget issues also start to get discussed. No layoffs and things are discussed in the fall. Instead, they focus on things like taking away course releases, reducing costs for the common book program under our unit, and things of that nature. This remains the case after many questions until March about how is this going to happen, considering that our budget is, as we've been told forever, very lean and really only consists of faculty salaries. We were assured that layoffs were not on the table consistently by the dean until March, when we were told that up to 17 people were going to have terminal contracts next year. So this is the rough timeline, and I want to focus on a couple of things here that with these contracts, again, the first in 2020. This was not done with any of us knowing. We had to organize and talk to people and make this thing happen on our own. We were successful in this, which is amazing. But the idea of this just happening behind closed doors is a very prominent thing throughout our unit and just the university in general. In faculty meetings of this academic year, budget cuts and what we were facing have shifted repeatedly. So we're looking at, as you can see with the numbers, in October, we're told it was almost 400,000. And by March, we're told that, we need 1.5 million. Now they found some money miraculously. I still have no idea how that is. It is now $1 million. And we were told that now we're facing a firm 10 to 12 set of layoffs. The provost in the faculty senate meeting yesterday said 12 to 15. So who knows? It's still very high and it's not zero. So this is a problem. So as you can see with this, there's various language that started to be implemented about right sizing. But again, reassured that there were no layoffs until the very end, where it became very clear in March that there were going to be, and that they were facing this currently, and that this is just going to happen. And it's said that this is not a question about what we do, because everyone understands that we are valuable to students and student success and retention. It's about that we just don't have the money. And I want to highlight that because throughout all of this process, the caps going to 19, all of the hirings, they were approved by the provost. In fact, the 19 cap was demanded all the way through to until the spring by the provost's office, only to be told that actually, like, this isn't serving all of the students that we need to, and we've been overspending for the past 3 years. So huge impacts on shared governance in the following ways, where we don't go along with the bylaws that has a set precedent of having internal elections. We have this expensive external search. We tried to have and went very far and got through the Policies and Procedures Committee to have codified policies determining how layoffs would be handled in the event that they become necessary. This was stalled, so it never got codified. And again, we have this continuous demand that our classes are capped at 19, and that we were assured that this was fiscally responsible when clearly it wasn't. It's being leveraged against us. So again, every increase in spending over the past 3 years was either specifically requested or greenlit by the provost. Searches, caps decreasing, etc. We were told in this most recent university college meeting that we're facing up to 12 layoffs. We're not allowed to know the process of how these will be determined. The dean has suggested stuff to the provost board. We were explicitly told that we could not know about them. However, she did give us a form to say, if we had any feedback on how these decisions should be made, we should give it to them. I just want to make that known. And that this will impact any contract, and for the first year faculty, should they choose to issue a 3-month contract for the first year faculty in June and then not reissue a contract, they'd be fired by fall. The dean and the chair are sure this is not going to happen, but it's obviously not clear. So again, facing huge cuts to faculty, contracts being, automatically renewed to now being terminated. What we've done as an area committee, we've created this petition. I know a lot of you have seen it. There is the QR code if you want to sign it and haven't read it. So I encourage you all to please do it, share it widely. We've gained significant support from students and faculty and VCU affiliates in general and community members, including Faculty Senate, who is writing and currently voting on a statement for the Board of Visitors and the President and the Provost on our behalf, and AUP as well. And we're currently planning on delivering the petition to the Provost and President. We started to get media attention. And in every way, we're just drawing attention to the fact that the well-being of students and faculty are being jeopardized because of budgetary mismanagement from administration. And that's just purely it. I mean, the whole thing is that if everything is predicated on student success, then gutting a unit that only exists for that reason is not the way to go. and that everything, any kind of budgetary problem that we're facing was generated by the provost's office, either explicitly or approved by them. So terrible for students, terrible for faculty in general. And also, I just think a looming problem when we're thinking about these larger ideas of how the provost wants to restructure the university. So on that fun note, I'm going to say I'll be in the, if we have any questions about this stuff, we can talk about this in the layoffs room. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about things in the breakouts. But yeah, thank you all. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate everything here, and I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm going to go ahead and pause recording. So I really want to thank everybody for being on the call tonight. It's incredibly powerful to see that we're at max capacity, like having a line out the door to get into this meeting is very moving. I really appreciate everybody being on this call and all the engaging questions that people brought to the table. We're going to be hosting as a union a second town hall on the budget in August. So as Kate mentioned, this is kind of stage one of unpacking VCU's budget and thinking about what questions we have, what the financial realities are, and what a people first budget process would actually look like. So the first thing I'm going to put in the chat for all of you is just a form that invites you to give us feedback on tonight's session and also share any questions that you have that are unaddressed that you'd like to see us address either in the report we're going to be working on this summer or in our next town hall, which we'll be hosting in August. The second thing I really want to stress is I would love to see all of you at our May Day cookout that is happening on Saturday. That's going to be from 2:30 to 3:30 at Bryan Park. We're going to be partnering with a number of different regional unions, including SEIU 512, which is the City Workers Union. This is going to be a family-friendly event. I know some of our educators who are on the call have a book reading that's going to happen for kids. We're going to have art projects. We have rented a ice cream truck. So if you enjoy fun things, this is going to be a really good place for you, not only to connect with other union members, but also to just hear a little bit more about union activity in Central Virginia generally. And then last, if you work at VCU, I want to invite you to join your union. This work happens because people do it. Unions are made of people. And I think one of the big goals that we have at VCU is debunking the idea that your union is some big institution outside of the people who live and work next to you every day. So we're not going to build the strength that we need to win some of the things that we talked about, some of the aspirational goals that we have, whether it's defeating layoffs, paying grad workers a living wage, making sure that our students don't live in buildings that are completely infected with black mold, real basic things that everybody should have. We're not going to win that stuff if we don't have everybody on board fighting for it. So please join us. We are very excited to build with you. And again, thank you so much for being with us tonight.